the subject of the need to serve. I hope that, again, as we said Sunday, this is going to help us move closer to God. That's the goal of this week, is wherever you are, that the intent is for us to get closer to God through the studies that we've had. And that's always our goal when we think about where we stand before a great God who loves us so much, that has done so much to allow us to be called His children and allow us to serve Him. And so tonight, as we talk about service, I hope that you will understand and realize that to be a servant is to be like Jesus, because He ultimately laid down His life for us and served us in a way that we can never repay. We could never serve in that great of way as He did, but yet at the same time we understand that He's left us that great example to follow. And so as we look tonight, I hope that we'll see that. A few years ago, I saw a cartoon in a church bulletin, and it showed a picture of a woman lying in a sick bed, obviously in misery. And in the sink over near the bed was a stack of dirty dishes that were piled up. And then there was a huge basket of clothes that sat nearby the bed where she was. Two children who were dirty and fighting with each other in the corner were also in the room. In the other side of the room, there was a cat that sat licking up spilled milk. And this smiling woman looked at the lady in the bed, standing in her doorway, and she said, "Well, Miss Florence, if there's anything I can do to help you, don't hesitate to let me know." You know, when you think about it, there are times where we say that, and I mentioned that Sunday, is the fact that sometimes we like to say, "Let me know if I can help you. Let me know if I can serve in any way." And when we think about that, a lot of times we never hear a call back from anybody. And for that reason, we need to be proactive in our service. And if we see a need like this lady had around her house while she was sick, then we need to be the people that actually get up there and we serve and we help meet those needs. Because we have things like that around us all the time that we will see that need doing, and we don't need to wait on somebody to ask us to do so. We need to just jump in and serve any way that we can. And I hope that we'll have that mentality, especially after we study this tonight, to truly sing the song, "Make me a servant, Lord, make me like you," and really mean that. And so when we look at serving, we're going to look at two different things about service tonight that I think will help us to get a clear picture of why we should serve. First of all tonight, let's notice the fact that we serve because it's about meeting others' needs. You know, when you think about opportunities to serve, there's usually something amiss in somebody's life that needs doing. And that's why we serve. It's an opportunity. Somebody needs help. Somebody needs something to help them in the situation that they're in. And many times when we think about where we are, a lot of times we think about the fact that if we would just make ourselves available to other people, then we would be more apt to serve. And so when we think about meeting the needs of those around us, first of all, we have to have eyes to see the needs. So many times we go through life and we really don't notice what the needs are around us. We tend to just kind of think about what we've got to do that day, and we don't really pay attention to those around us and what they're going through. And there are hints all around us every day of those that are struggling, those that need encouragement, that maybe need help with certain things in life. And yet when we look at them, we think, well, you know, I hope that sometime maybe they'll get where they need to be. And we fail to realize that that's our job, that that's something that we ought to do. And so serving is ultimately about being available to other people. And we see that with Jesus. In Matthew chapter 15, we find the fact that it's really an overview of one of the things that Jesus was all about as he traveled around, and that was helping people. Here in Matthew 15, look at verses 29 and following. It says, "Jesus departed from there, skirted the Sea of Galilee, and went up on the mountain and sat down there. Then great multitudes came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, and many others, and they led them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. And so here you see that Jesus was available to people. And obviously we see Jesus having the power to heal that we really don't. But don't miss the fact that Jesus was available to people at all times. There were times where Jesus had been teaching for hours, and yet he would still help somebody that the other people wouldn't help or touch. And so Jesus was always available. And I think that's one of the keys when it comes to our serving God, is the fact that so many times we're unavailable for other people because of our schedule, because of our focus in life, and we fail to see those opportunities. And when you think about service, obviously service is not an event, it's a way of life. It's something that we naturally do once we get in that mindset. Now, it's not natural to us when we first come into this world, but it should be something that develops within all of us to where we naturally want to serve. We naturally see the needs around us and we meet those needs. And so we need to be available to people. There was a fella over in Meridian, Mississippi named George Phillips. I hope nobody knows him in here. But George looked out his back window one night and he noticed that his light was on out in his garage, out in his shop. And he asked his wife, he said, "Have you been out there?" And she said, "No." And then he looked back out and he saw some movement in there. And he knew he was being robbed. So he picks up the phone and he calls the police and he says, "Hey, I'm being robbed. Will you hurry over?" And they said, "Well, I'm sorry. We've got limited resources and we've only got a few officers and it's going to be a while before we can get over there." He said, "Really?" And so he hung up the phone with the police, waited about 2 minutes, and he called back. And he said, "Don't worry about coming. I went ahead and shot all the robbers out here in my backyard." And they said, "What?" And so all of a sudden, within 2 minutes, all these police cars show up at his house. And they go and they find these guys and they arrest them. And they came to the fellow named George here and they said, "I thought you said that you shot these guys." And he said, "I thought you said y'all weren't available to come." And that's the thing, is so many times we think that we're not available, but we really are if we make the time to do what needs to be done. And so when you look at Luke chapter 10, this is one of those occasions where we look at a familiar chapter, and this is the story that we like to refer to as that of the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10, one that you've read probably thousands of times, but I want you to notice something here about the three men that came and saw this guy in need. And so many times what we do when we read this is we will look and we'll say, well, you had that priest and you had that Levite, and those are the two bad guys. And we label people a lot of times, don't we? Those are the two bad ones because they didn't stop and help. And that's why we call this Samaritan guy the Good Samaritan, right? Because he was good and he stopped and helped. Okay, read this with me again and let's pull out a couple of things. It says, "Then Jesus answering said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road. When he came where he was, he saw him, and he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among thieves? And he said to him, He who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. Now, every time we look at that, we always look at this Samaritan and we think, that's the guy we want to be like, and the other 2, we don't want to be like him. And so many times we look at the priest and we look at the Levite and we say, now, those guys just weren't, they weren't really godly men, because if they were godly men, they would have stopped and helped, right? But what I want you to think about is this. How many of us probably are the priest or the Levite every week of our lives? How many times do we see somebody in need, and yet because of time or schedule or events that we need to get to, we pass by on the other side. I'm the first one to tell you I'm guilty of it. There are times where I look back on my day and I think, man, I should have helped in this situation. We were in Wendy's not very long ago, and it was Christy and I and Brooks, our oldest son. And we were eating, I guess, before a Wednesday night Bible study. And we went in there and we ate. And there was a little old lady in front of us in line. And we talked for a minute in line, and she got her food. But after we got ours and sat down, I noticed she was sitting in a booth by herself. And I don't know why. I'm usually not very attentive to that type of thing. But there was a part of me that thought, we need to invite her to come over here and eat with us. I mean, this lady, I don't know what her situation is. She might be a widow. She might just happen to be here by herself and usually has somebody with her. I don't know what her situation is. Never met her before. But there was part of me that thought, we need to go invite her to come and eat with us. But you know, we got in our conversation and we never did do that. And she got up and she went on out and went on her way. And we ate our food and went on to Bible study. But you know, I think about missed opportunities just because, you know, I wasn't thinking or I wasn't acting on even some thoughts that I had. And I wonder how many times we're like the priest and Levi. You see, these guys were not bad guys. The priest, the Levi, I mean, they're servants of God. They have their duties in the temple. They were guys that helped with the worship and all that. And so these guys, from a moral standpoint, they were good people. Most of them were respected in their communities. And so it doesn't say that they passed by on the other side and went and did some evil thing. They just failed to help this guy. And so when we look at this, let me put it this way. 1 out of 3 guys made himself available to the guy who needed help. When you look at it that way, it kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it? 1 out of 3 guys made himself available to meet this guy's needs. And so the Samaritan, he does take the time to stop, to bind up his wounds, to put him on his own animal, to take him into town, stays with him, takes care of him. Now let me tell you, service is an inconvenience to what you're normally going to do. And I think that's number 1 on our schedule or on our list of reasons why we don't help more than we do, is because we've got a fairly tight schedule, and we don't leave room in there for God to allow us to serve somebody or for Him to put somebody in our path, and we take the time to do that. And so when we think about service, it's about meeting others' needs, but it's about us being available to do that. And again, it's not about an event. So many times I think we have done maybe our young people an injustice or even our congregations by simply saying that a lot of times we're having a service project or we're going on a mission trip. Have you ever thought about that? When we go on mission trips, a lot of times what we will do is we're in gear. You know, we're ready to go on a mission trip, and we get there and we're ready to teach somebody. We get off the bus or out of the van or out of the car, and we're like, okay, that's why we're here. We're here to serve. We're here because this is a mission trip. Hey, we're going to invite all these kids to come to Vacation Bible School. We're going to try to study with their parents. We're going to do all these things. And we do that for a week, and then we get back on the bus and we go home, and guess what we do? We go back to our old ways of not even thinking about being on mission. Don't even think about it. We kind of flip the switch. Hey, we're on mission. And then when we come back from a mission trip, now we're off mission. Same thing with service. A lot of times we'll do a service event, service project. Maybe you have a servant Sunday at the church. And all these people come and they find ways to serve, and everybody gets involved for that day or for that event. And then we go back home and we kind of do our own thing again. And I don't think in any way Jesus intended for us to make Christianity about certain events on our calendar. He made us to be servants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Wherever we are, we ought to be serving. And so here, again, it's about making ourselves available. When we think about Philippians chapter 2, there it talks about the fact that Jesus took on the form of a bondservant. When I think about that, I'm thinking here Jesus, the Son of God, has placed Himself at the level of a bondservant in order that He might serve others. Now, this is the Son of God, folks. This is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He has humbled himself to the point where he's taken the form of a bondservant. When I think about that, I can't help but think about our trip in 8th grade to Jamestown and Colonial Williamsburg. We went on that trip with our kids up there. And I remember on our way back from there, we stopped at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home. Many of you may have been there. Well, we toured the home, and I remember right after the formal tour, going through all the rooms of the house, they said, now you're free to wander the grounds and see the rest of the place. And I kind of went off on my own, mainly because I've been tired of being with 8th graders on the bus for the last few days. So I go off by myself, and I end up going around the building, around the front over to the side. And I'm the only one going over there for whatever reason. And I start looking, and all of a sudden I see all these little rooms underneath the house. And it kind of intrigues me. So I go a little closer, and I start looking inside them. And I notice that as you look in each of these rooms, they're kind of lined up right next to each other, that inside that room was a bed and a basin and a dirt floor. And that was it. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, this is where the servants lived that served Thomas Jefferson. Now, when you went in his room, there was no dirt floor. There was a very nice bed with a very thick mattress. There was all kinds of luxuries up there. But if you were a servant for him, you were in one of those rooms under the house. Now, when you think about that, you think, well, that's terrible. He shouldn't have treated them that way. But, you know, if you really think about it, even the servants in the Bible that we read of, they had a very close relationship with their masters many times. Their masters loved them. They took care of them. They did all kinds of things. If they ever needed shoes, the master would buy them shoes. They needed clothes. He fed them. He took care of them. And so their position was one that they just understood. That's their role. And they owned that. And they really related to the master that they served in such a great way. And folks, that's where we live. It's not something, again, that we come in and out of. That's where we are. You know, they didn't go home on the weekends. They lived there. That was their life. And that's what I think about when I think about us being servants, is that's our life. That's who we are all the time. And so when it comes to being a servant, we see the fact that it's about, again, being available. And we must notice those needs around us and be available to those, because those are opportunities to change people's lives. You think about just one act of service many times makes a huge impact on others. We've got a fella at Stony Point, and he has COPD. He has all kinds of breathing problems. He used to be one of our elders, but because of poor health, he had to resign. And his name's Paul, and Paul can't do a whole lot. He can barely come to worship, every other week now. But you know what Paul does? Paul gets out his notebook and his pen, and he gets the visitor list every week, and he writes them a 2 or 3 page letter and mails it to them. One day somebody asked, I wonder how many people in this congregation that are new members here in the last few years ever got a letter from Paul Scott. And so I asked him one day, I said, how many of you in here have ever gotten a letter from Paul Scott? There were hands going up everywhere. And I don't know how many times we hear feedback about the letters that he writes and how much it meant to them for somebody to sit down and write out a handwritten note that was that long. I mean, it meant so much to them. In the day of the computer age, in the day of email and cell phones and texts, this written letter means so much to old and young alike. Does it seem like a big deal to write somebody a letter? I used to think cards, why waste your time writing a card? Nobody really pays attention to them. They get them and throw them in the garbage. I wish I could have brought it with me, but I have a cardboard box. It's about this wide and about that deep of cards that we saved when Julie was in the hospital that we got from so many brethren, probably from some of you. And how much those cards meant to us. We ended up wallpapering her room at rehab when she was learning how to walk again from the paralysis she had from the tumor. We just lined them up. We taped them. I'd come in every day. We'd read them, and then we'd tape them up just to keep her encouraged up on the wall. And she had a roommate, and bless her heart, she was sitting over there, and she said, "Nobody sends me any cards." And I felt so bad. One day, she just screamed out over next to us. And I said, "What is it?" She said, "I finally got a card." One card. And here we are. I almost felt guilty for having all of ours hanging up there. But what I'm saying is, acts of service don't have to be great to make an impact. They just have to be something that you do to help others. And those little things mean so much more than even some of the big things that you can do. And so when we're talking about service and being a servant, being available, don't think that it's going to take up a whole lot of time and take a whole lot of effort on your part. But I can guarantee you this, once you start doing it, it'll become contagious. You'll start wanting to do more and more of it. And so when you think about changing people's lives, that's what service is about. And that's what's going to change our community. We talk about electing the right officials and changing the laws and all that. But I can tell you, we don't need more Christians in power. We need more people that will start from the bottom and work up. We need more people that not having a gavel or a sword in their hands, but those that have a basin and a towel that will go about and serve. That's what's going to change our communities. That's what's going to change our country, is being people who serve. And remember this, that saved people serve people. That's who we are. That's what we're supposed to do. If we're saved people, that's an automatic. Then we serve others. And so first of all, we think about what is the need for us to serve. The first need is the others around us, to meet those needs. But secondly, let's also realize that it's about meeting our needs. When we serve, we actually gain a great benefit from that. In John chapter 13, after Jesus had washed the disciples' feet, you remember the fact that he tells them that they should do as he has done unto them. But then he says, if you do these things, in verse 17, if you do these things, blessed or happy will you be. And that's the key to our happiness. That's the key to being blessed, is serving others. And if you've ever served others, and I would dare say all of us at one point in time in here have had those moments where we were able to help in some way. Think about the satisfaction, the good feeling that you get, the happiness that you get from doing something for somebody else. And again, it helps us forget about our own problems so many more times when we do that. When we think about it, God designed us to serve others because of that feeling that we do get when we do take part in that. It doesn't come natural to us, but it is something that we can learn to do, and once we learn to do it, we see how effective it is. But you know, when you think about it, we're a lot like the disciples. In Mark chapter 10, you have the guys that are talking about wanting to be great in the kingdom, and they go so far as to have one of their mamas come and ask for a position for them. I always get tickled when I read that a little bit because, you know, how many times does mom get involved in a situation with her kids? And, you know, especially when they're little, but here are two grown men and mom's getting involved with it. And here it says that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us that we may sit one on your right hand and the other on your left hand in your glory." Now, another account other than Mark's mentions the fact that their mother also was asking about that. But notice the fact that here they are looking at the kingdom of God as an earthly kingdom. And they're thinking of a throne physically and to be in power, to be able to sit one on the right and one on the left. And here their request is that we want to be great. That's really what they're asking for. They say, we want to be great in this kingdom that you're going to establish. And Jesus, on many occasions, and this is one of them that's recorded, he tries to tell them that it's really the opposite of what they're thinking. If you're going to be great in my kingdom, he says, you're actually going to be a servant. Now, he compares it to the kingdoms of the world, of the Gentiles, and he says, obviously those who serve in the Gentile world lord it over them, and you know how they exercise great authority over others. But he says in verse 43, "Yet it shall not be so among you. Whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. Whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." And so here, he's talking to them about the struggle that they're having. And again, we can relate, can't we? Because I really, if I'm going to be honest, I like to be served a whole lot more than I like to serve others, just in general. I like it when somebody says, "Would you like me to fill your tea glass again?" I'll say, "Oh yes, please do that." And they bring the tea and they bring my food and then they clean up after me. I mean, that's really great, isn't it? And so when you think about being served, it's kind of this idea that that's where happiness really is. We like to be served. But Jesus says real happiness and real greatness in life is about serving others, not about being served. And so he's trying to get them through the struggle of their understanding of the kingdom. But when you think about it, once you start living out what he has said for us to do, it starts to make sense, doesn't it? It really does mean a lot for us to be able to grasp the idea that serving others helps us to be more like Jesus. Because, did you hear that last line? Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve. Now, was there any person who ever deserved service that has ever lived on the face of this earth more than Jesus? Nobody deserved serving above him. And yet he was one that said, "I'll be the servant, and I'll show you the way to greatness in my kingdom." And so we need to follow that example. Many of you recognize the name Dan Cathy. He's the CEO of Chick-fil-A. And he was in Southern California overseeing the building of one of his Chick-fil-A restaurants. He had his project manager with him, and they're looking over the building. They're going through all the dusty, dirty construction area there. Well, they get hungry while they're there, and obviously Chick-fil-A's not quite open yet. And so they go across the street to Taco Bell. And they go into Taco Bell, but they're dusty from being in the construction zone. So they go in the bathroom and they wash up before they eat. Well, after Dan Cathy washes his hands, he notices, or the guy with him, his project manager, notices that Dan Cathy is not only drying his hands, but now he's wiping down the sink and he's cleaning up the area where they just came and washed. And his project manager said, "What are you doing? Why are you cleaning up the competition's restroom?" And he said this. He said, "We teach our employees to leave the place better than you found it, even if it's not yours." And so here's a man in business that realizes that serving others makes a big impact on those around you. And for him as the CEO to set the example, to make sure that he did not what he just told his employees to do, but that he really did what that he expected of them. He showed that example, and that's what we need to do, no matter where we are. And I can't help but think about one summer I worked at Kmart. And there was a guy named Mr. Clark. He was the store manager. And he was a pretty hard-nosed guy. And I was in the stock room, and here I am, a college student, and so I'm up there moving boxes and all that. And what they would do is they would back this big truck up to the bay, and they would unload all the merchandise for the store, and they'd put it on the conveyor belts, and they'd check it in, and then they'd send it upstairs to me, and I have to put it in these little areas. Lawnmowers and grills went over here, detergent went over here. I mean, it was just this, it was as long and as big as this auditorium, and that conveyor belt came up the middle. And once it hit the back wall, they couldn't send any more up. So I was up there frantically working. It's summertime, I'm hot, I'm sweaty, and it's just me. And there's 4 or 5 down there just shipping things up there to me. And I'm working, and all of a sudden I see that I'm behind, and here comes Mr. Clark up the steps. And he looks at me with that look, like, "You're not getting it done." But he just looks at me. He didn't say a word. And then he does this. And he starts rolling up his shirt sleeves from his dress shirt and his tie. And he rolls them up to his elbows. And I thought, is he going to hit me? What's he going to do? And so he reaches down, he picks up a box, he sets it over here. And he starts doing exactly what I've been frantically trying to do. So obviously I start back and I start doing it too. And he helps me for about 30 minutes until I get caught up. And then he just kind of looked at me again and rolled his sleeves down and walked down. Never said a word. Never got on me about it. You know, I've had so much respect for that man. Here he is at the top, CEO guy. You know, here he is, the boss man, the manager of the store. And yet he would come and help me. I'm the lowest of employees at this point. And yet he would roll up his sleeves and help me. Did I think less of him? I mean, here he is. He's store manager. Is he really going to lower himself to a stock boy's position? I mean, wouldn't he lose some sort of status with all the people in the stock room if he came in there and lowered himself to do that kind of a job? I mean, we would surely quit having respect for him, right? It's really the opposite, isn't it? The fact that now, because he was willing to do that, all of us respected him so much more. And that's what we've got to get in our minds, folks, is people will not look down on us for serving. They will actually appreciate and look at us in such a greater way. And that's what Jesus is trying to communicate is when we meet others' needs, it actually meets our need of being great in the kingdom, about being great in God's eyes. You know, how many times have we heard the scriptures about humbling yourself in the sight of the Lord and He will lift you up? And all these servant type of scriptures that we read about. And so when you think about so many times we fail to realize that it meets our needs to serve just as much as it does others. And many times, though, Satan has a way of making service be about us. And there are times where we think about serving and we start figuring out, I want to serve people that I like, or I want to serve when it's convenient for me, or I want to serve when maybe people can see it the most. I actually had a guy walk down the aisle one Sunday morning. He sat on the front pew, and I said, what can we pray with you about? He was a member of the church there, and he said, I just want to confess that I've been doing a lot of work around the church building so that I could get my name in the bulletin. And I thought, well, that's being honest, isn't it? I mean, nobody's ever confessed that before. But what he was doing was he was kind of handy, and he'd replace ceiling tiles that needed replacing. He did a lot of different jobs around there. But he did it out of the motive of being recognized. He wanted people to think he was great, and he had the wrong motive, and he realized that. And so he confessed that. And he realized service was more about him than it was about others. There was a group of teenagers that a youth minister took to a homeless shelter one day, and they served them food through a soup kitchen. And the youth minister got the group back together afterward, and he said, well, what'd you think? And they said, well, we really didn't like it. And he said, well, why didn't you like it? He said, well, all those people came through, and we served them, and not one of them said thank you to us. And the youth minister thought about it for a minute, and he thought, boy, you know, they've really missed the point. And then it settled in with him that he does the same thing. That he serves sometimes for the thank you. He serves for the reaction that it would get from other people. You ought to be more thankful for me, is the attitude. And so that's where we have to be careful, even in our service to God, is it's not about us, it's about Him. And it's not about the thank yous or the pats on the back or having our name in the bulletin. It's again about doing things that bring honor and glory to God and not to us. And not to be picky about who we choose to serve. Because sometimes we pick somebody to serve that somehow or another is going to benefit us in the future, right? We won't serve this guy, but hey, this guy may can help me later, or maybe this guy to appreciate me more than this guy. And so we'll serve who we think will benefit us the most. And so Jesus wants us to serve everybody at all times. And Jesus wants service that doesn't have to be noticed. And I think that's the key to it. It's not about recognition. It doesn't have to be recognized by anybody other than Him. You know, what's He say in Matthew 6? When you do a charitable deed, do it where your left hand doesn't know what your right hand's doing, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. It's all about doing it not for the recognition, but for His honor and glory. And so when we think about things like Mark chapter 10, where they're struggling with this and they're having a hard time, then he just wants to teach us this great lesson about serving because it makes an impact in the lives of others. It meets their needs, and then it helps us because God designed us in such a way that we really want to be like Him. And Jesus was a servant, and we need to be like Him as well. The last thing I want to leave with you tonight is, again, Matthew 25. I know I brought this up earlier, but one thing that I didn't mention out of this that really hit me at one point. All of us have this goal of going to heaven, and we know what Matthew 25 says about those servants that were given the talents. We want to hear these words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," right? Enter into the joys of thy Lord. And it hit me one day of this very fact. You can't be called a servant on that day if you're not serving now. God is not going to call you what you are not. Well done, good and faithful servant. And so if He's going to call us that, then we better embody that very thing. Because we want to hear those words, don't we? And so we ought to serve. Again, not because we're working our way to heaven or not because we're trying to get on God's good side. It's just the fact that that's exactly what He created us for. We are His workmanship, created unto God, unto good works. And so when you think about the judgment scene, it was about those who served versus those who didn't serve. Those who acted, like we talked about earlier, and those who didn't. And so I hope tonight that all these things help remind us that when we serve, it does help other people. And that's the goal, is to help others not only with their physical needs, but with their spiritual needs. We want to help them not only be fed for a day, we want them to have that bread of life, that they'll never hunger again. You know, we want to make sure that they see Jesus not just in the fact that we're helping them, but also in how they can follow Him just like we are. And so tonight, as you think about being a servant, I hope that you'll also know the fact that it helps meet your own needs. That's a place within you that only is filled up when you actually go and serve. And it makes you so much happier, and it makes you so much more connected to who Jesus really is. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, we want to encourage you to be a servant and start that walking like Jesus as you commit your life to following Him. It may be that you haven't obeyed the gospel. Love for you to believe that Jesus is His Son, to repent of your sins, confess Him as Lord, and be baptized. Even tonight, love to see you have your sins washed away and in obedience to what God has commanded. It may be that you are a Christian and you know you ought to be a servant, but you've made excuses and you've thought about other things that have kept you from it. And tonight, we can all repent where we are, can't we? We can change our mindset and our hearts and our actions from here on out. But if you want our prayers, that's what we're here for. We're here to help everybody get closer to God. And so tonight, if we can help you, we invite you to come right now as we stand and sing.